Welcome to the Paws and Effect podcast. I'm your host, Dr Carra, and in this podcast we explore the topic of fear-free pets. So each month we'll be interviewing different experts and discussing pet-related topics to help you, our listener. And today I'm really excited for you to sit back, relax, and let's dive into the subject of fear-free pets. And I'm very excited to welcome our guest speaker, Daniel Stewart, KZN's animal behaviourist. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So we are very aware, as a vet and as a pet owner, I'm very aware of the requirement for you as an animal behaviourist. A survey conducted by the South African Veterinary Association in 2019 found that 70% of pet owners in South Africa reported their pets to have behavioural issues. So it's clearly a common problem. And one I'm excited to discuss with you today.
Yeah. No, it certainly is a problem, and I see it all the time. I mean, of course, that's my business, but I do see it's the same as your business. You know, people come and bring pets into you for certain reasons. Unfortunately, you run an emergency clinic where it's an emergency; they have to be seen immediately. But there's a lot of your normal day-to-days like vaccinations and things like that. But for ours, from a behaviourist point of view, it's really sad to actually see these pets that are not functioning properly within a home environment. And I think that's why it's so important that we actually have fear-free and try and promote it all the time, where it is, as I say, it's from a pet's perspective as well as the owner's perspective. And I think it's a lot of time people get overwhelmed with the potential problems that pets cause. So I think it's a great subject, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
So let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about how to identify whether your pet or our patients are fearful. So what are the common signs of fear?
You know, the most common signs that I find, also working in veterinary practices as well, is that dogs, first, the moment that door opens from that vet practice, the dog steps back. And what does the owner do? They tighten the lead and they drag the dog in. Okay. You know, and that's immediately the first sign that I would see. If the dog does walk in, it often goes along and sits in your waiting room, and it goes and it hides under the chair. So there's another sign, very clear sign that's there. Another one, a receptionist might go, oh, shame, let's give it a treat, which is great. And I think I'll always try and recommend it. But if the dog doesn't take the treat, there is a clear sign of stress of some sort. So it's little things like that people often just pass by. They go, oh, well, it's not hungry. Or it's no, hold on a minute. There's a problem here. And then we need to then start looking at it, and that's when the vets come out and then they see it and put more pressure on the dog, and maybe the dog will then take it to a further level of a snap or something like that, which is very negative for everybody then. So we need to rectify the problem as it walks through the front door.
Of course, I agree. So other typical signs for pet owners, what are the kind of signs they'll display within a household?
The household is, you'll find that the dogs will have a preferred place to go, which is excluded from the family.
Okay.
That's a common thing.
So isolation.
It's not necessarily an open bed. It's like behind the couch, that kind of isolation. You will, if there's a slight bang in the house, the dog will cringe. And it's not always the fact people think, oh, it's head shy, it's hand shy. And it's, hold on a minute, the dog has been fearful from a sound perspective, not from a owner being abusive. It's simply what the dog and the mood state that the dog is actually in at that moment. And then there's those correlations of what could happen. And the dog's starting to overthink things.
Okay, so perhaps we can explore some more of the sort of behavioural signs as we talk about what are the most common things that our pets are fearful of. Obviously, you've mentioned going to the vet, which I think we all understand may be quite a stressful and fearful situation for pet owners as well as their pets. But what other situations do you find pets fearful? I mean, are we talking sort of severe thunderstorms or?
Yeah, no. So sound is a big thing.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter what sound. It could be the rubbish truck. Because those hydraulic brakes working and things like that. I've noticed that a couple of times when the dogs cringe when that happens. Backfiring of cars, thunderstorms, And even to the point where we've had it before, where there was a thunderstorm and the dog was all calm, but then a branch has fallen out of a tree. It's something silly things, but it's just not common. And the dog has now become fearful, and it's an association of the thunderstorm, where in actual fact, it had nothing to do with the thunderstorm.
Okay.
It could even...
So previous trauma.
Previous trauma, exactly.
Okay.
So there's a lot of different things that we can actually see where is the dog fearful. A lot of people come along and say, please, can you help me get the dog walking on a lead better? And because the dog puts the lead on and runs. Now, that's just wanting to go for a walk.
Okay.
But other owners phone me up and go, my dog won't go for a walk with me.
Wow.
Well, why? Let's have a look at the reasons why it won't. And once we start understanding the reasons why it won't do something or why it does do something, then we can actually break it all down and start working on that specific point in the dog's behavior and trying to change that or modify that behavior.
That's great. And so what are the sort of things that pet owners, what can they do to make their pets feel less fearful? What are the suggestions you feel are going to be most effective in situations like that?
I find, and we'll get onto potentially medications and a lot of training, things like that, but I find the crux of everything is that a lot of the owners, they try, and if the dog reacts to something, they immediately go in and trying to pacify the dog. So they go, it's okay, my darling, it's okay. And they try, and then the owner starts getting a little bit anxious, and I can see it within the owner. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And they start over-vocalizing. That actually is rewarding the dog for in that mood state, to stay in that mood state. And we find that if you just go, well, is it being seriously detrimental to the dog? No. Then leave the dog alone. And the dog then works it out itself that, oh, that sound or that thing actually is not dangerous. Nothing to be fearful of. And we get over it. So the dog actually comes out of it by itself, as opposed to us going, it's okay, and patting it.
So it's reinforcing that
behavior. It's reinforcing that behavior.
Okay.
And I know the owners want to help and think they're helping, but sometimes they're actually doing a bit of damage. And I don't want to blame the owners, not at all. I think the owners, it's great that the owners are caring and loving. But I think if they are, just take a little short step back and go, what are we doing?
How am I impacting their behavior?
How are they impacting it? Okay. Correct.
So let's come up with a scenario. We know we have a pet. For example, we've had a client who's asked us recently, how do I handle the dogs when they're really, really fearful of a thunderstorm? So let's use the example of a thunderstorm. What are the kind of things that you can put in place either ahead of time or at the time of a thunderstorm in order to try and help manage that fearful response?
Well, what is really interesting is that even from my own personal experience, is that I've always trained my dogs from puppies to every time there was a thunderstorm, I'd go and play ball with them. So they would associate the thunderstorm as a playtime, and it was like great fun. It's that's conditioning the dog that actually everything's fine. Okay. But it was a neighbour's dog that kept on coming over to my place in a thunderstorm because it was fearful. And now my dog started to be fearful as well because it started picking up on that dog's behaviour. All right? So it was a little bit difficult from that side. So it's very easily to manipulate a behaviour, negatively or positively. Okay? However, if you are very observant of your dogs or your animals, in fact, cats and dogs, we mustn't forget about the cats.
Absolutely.
Is that they will start picking up that pressure change in the atmosphere, believe it or not. People go, really? I don't feel it. But the animal does. And it'll start telling you that there's a storm on the way. So now we can start predicting it. We can start preempting that potential fear and start resolving it before it becomes a fear. Okay. So, we've got a lot of medication on over-the-counter medication that really does help with thunderphobic dogs.
Yeah.
With my cat in particular, she comes in and she sits in the middle of the lounge, and I then go along and give her a little bit of valerian root, and she's just so chilled. And you can have whatever kind of storm you want, but she knows that's her safe spot because she's got her drug.
So you talk about a safe spot. So preempt the behavior, use medication if you need it.
Only if you need it.
But
yeah.
the safe spot, is that a big feature of...
It is. And I find that even to the point where some dogs, in fact, I actually built a cupboard for a dog once because that's where the dog wanted to be. So let's make it more comfortable for it. And it was a safe zone. Doesn't matter what it was. It was a very, very fearful dog. So anybody even coming home, it would run to the cupboard. So we built basically a kennel in the cupboard for the dog's safe place. And that comes along also crate training. You can bring that into it, but normally it needs to be quite dark, a little bit of noise reducing kind of environment, so a nice thick blanket or something like that over the crate, and that kind of stuff really, really helps because nothing ever negative happens in that space.
Okay.
So
they've got a good association with the space.
Good, yes, correct.
Okay. And things like, would you advise turning on fans or playing music or turning the TV on, or do those sort of things help?
They do help, and what I don't think we do this enough, even in puppy training, is that you can actually get CDs, and I'm talking now going back to their developmental stages of a couple of weeks old, is that you could actually even get a CD that sounds thunderstorms and things like that. Wow. And then every time the dog just doesn't interact with the speaker, we can actually give it a reward. So in other words, it's just starting to ignore that. Now that's preempting for the rest of its life and associating it, especially when we do certainly have your storm seasons. And if you have a puppy that's out of storm season, rather put it in there through audios of storms. But now we've got an adult dog that is thunderphobic. Play music, absolutely. That it just dampens the thunder. Close the curtains. It just stops that extra sound coming through the windows. It's those little things that can actually really help. What we also sometimes advise, depending on how severe the fear is support the dog. If it goes into a panic, it's going to do damage to itself. So rather support a very, very fearful dog when needed. But if it's not that fearful and it's going to become more fearful, then rather allow the dog to work itself. So it's a bit of a balance that you must play with the dog and how deep it goes.
And tell me, what is the impact of people getting uptight at the time? Because I think, you've experienced a thunderstorm with your dog before, or cat, and you start to feel tense. So we relate a lot of how we feel, and we actually impose a lot of those behaviors onto our animals by tensing up. You used the example of grabbing the lead earlier and being tense and actually inducing fear in those moments. How much about our behavior actually impacts our pets?
I believe it impacts the dogs a lot, a heck of a lot.
Okay.
And why I say the environment in which the dogs live in can also depict the behavior that the dogs have. So if we come along and thunderstorm, let's stay to that scenario, is that thunderstorm's starting to go off and that your dog is going to be maybe running around, going a bit crazy, and you come along and now you start screaming and shouting at the dog just to try and calm it down because the damn thing is there. It does not help at all. Rather support the dog. Rather, find that safe zone for it. Rather go along and put it in there so we cannot do damage to itself by being so fearful that it runs. And that's where your fight and flight response comes in. And in the brain, the amygdala of the brain responds so fast, and the dog will react to what it thinks to a point, but then it comes into danger. So rather prevent that from happening, and the dog might still be fearful in the safe zone, but at least it can't do damage to itself, which I think is really, really important.
That's the critical thing. So let's talk breeds.
Wow.
Yes, it had to come up. Selecting the right breed for a household, or selecting a breed that you can cope with in terms of the potential behavioural issues. Obviously, some breeds are more prone to stress or more likely to be anxious. How do you make sure that you're selecting a pet that is going to suit, like you say, either your ability to deal with those behaviours or your general lifestyle, so that you're not actually taking on something that's going to induce anxiety both for your family members, yourself, and the pet?
I mean, there are a lot of breeds out there. And now there are even more breeds because they're mixing the breeds purposely, you know, and registering them. So you've got labby poodles and doodles and all that kind of stuff, which is, I mean, they're really nice dogs. But knowing the characteristics of the individual breed, I think you need to do your research before you just go out and go, oh, it's cute, let's buy one, you know. And also, of course, getting it from reputable breeders. I think that's a big problem because then the genetics are actually right, you know, because they selectively breeding for a home environment as opposed to a work environment, you know. I think that's one step that we very seldom really focus on.
So do you advise people go and look at the parents of the...
If they're getting a purebred dog, okay, or a registered dog, then definitely looking at the parents. I would not recommend going along buying something over Facebook or internet, you know. Absolutely. Rather go along into the actual parents. But if you go into a shelter, you know, there are a lot of good dogs in shelters. Absolutely. Dogs. So, you know, rather go along and take something that actually needs a home as opposed to creating something, you know, something else. But again, even those dogs in shelters, we need to really look at it. And I think if it's a good shelter, you can go and spend some time with it. Understand the behavior, understand the personality of the dog. You know,
so from the breed perspective as well as
well as the individual.
Okay.
You know, we come along and often I see, oh, well, I've got 2 young boys, therefore I can get a little active dog. And the dog is actually beyond active. You know, you might come along and get a Belgian Malinois, you know, and now that these dogs are intense, if you don't put enough energy into them, they become very, very intense and they think a lot for themselves. Now it becomes a potential problem because, you know, on those sports days where you want to go along and play soccer with your kids, the dog goes, no, I want to do something else. And it's those kind of things that I find becoming a problem from a behavioral point of view because a lot of destruction comes along. Now the dog's digging up your garden, you know, eating your plant pots, whatever. And then those dogs end up in shelter because they can't cope, you know. And I think one must be very, very careful of looking at those traits and those personalities of the individual dog that you want to try and get. Does that answer you?
Yes, it does, and I think that's very clear. So from what I'm understanding is, you know, obviously we're trying to encourage pets to be rehomed, but they may be in those shelters or they may have been given up because of their behavioural issues. So sort of understanding the breed is really critical, but then also going along, meeting them, taking the time to make those decisions, considering it from a perspective of how much time do I have to dedicate and commit to this animal.
Correct.
Seeing any potential issues and whether you can financially or emotionally deal with them, and then working with those issues early on. We're going to take a break. Thank you for your attention. This podcast is sponsored by UltraPet, so I'm going to take a moment to read you their manifesto. For more than 25 years, we at UltraPet have made it our mission to take the ifs, buts, and maybes out of premium pet food. Because when we say scientifically formulated, it's a fact. When we say value, the numbers speak for themselves. When we say more meat, the proof is in the pudding. And when we say we care, our accident cover delivers. What sets us apart is not one thing, it's all the things combined. Because we understand that when it comes to your pets, you want certainty on all fronts. You want absolutes, the absolute best, given your means. Premium quality, but without the exorbitant cost. So, rest assured that any claim we make, we stand by. It's our commitment to your pets, our promise to you. And to prove it, we're willing to put our money where our mouth is.
And I find that, you know, especially if people prefer to get a puppy, let's resolve the problem as soon as possible. Don't come along and go, well, let's wait until he's a year old. Let's wait until maybe he'll grow out of it at 2 years old. And then all of a sudden, it's an entrenched behavior. And now we've got a huge problem on our hands. And a lot of the times, those dogs go into shelters because the owners have thought that they've tried everything. You know, and that's why, you know, there are behaviourists, there are people that can help those owners, as long as they are prepared to open up their minds and thinking, okay, fine, well, there are people out there to help.
So I'm going to give you a scenario. Let's say we've been sensible, we've selected a breed that's going to be suitable for our family environment. Perhaps we've decided to go down the route of a purebred, and I've checked out the breeder and the history, and I've sought advice and made sure that they're reputable, and I am going to get this puppy. So how do I start this puppy's life in the best way to ensure that I am not inducing any behavioral issues, particularly fear-based issues? How do I go? What do I need to do? What do I need to know?
First of all, I think it's really important to understand the developmental stages of the dog. You know, by the time we get the dog as a new owner, the dog is 6-8 weeks old, right? So it's already gone through or going near the end of its socializing period. Now, it starts socializing with its litter mates, of course, and the mother and things like that, but very few people, number one. If the dog gets to, let's say, week 14, right, and it hasn't seen many people, it might have only seen the breeder, all right, it is fearful of people.
Gosh.
All right, so early in life. But we might get the dog at, let's say, 8 weeks old. So I would always recommend, of course, proper socializing. That's number one, critical.
Okay.
And it's not just socializing with other dogs. It is socializing with everything. So the cat, the people, old people, young people, you know, sounds of cars.
Vacuum cleaner.
Vacuum cleaners, exactly. You know, even taking out the rubbish bag, you know, and that big black thing, all of a sudden there's making noise and rustling. Anything you can possibly get the dog to be inquisitive about and be, you know, exploratory as such.
So as early on in their development as
Early
possible.
on in their development, because one starts around about week 5, okay, although we're still in that critical socializing period, but around about week 5, they start creating hazard avoidance. That's really young. That's even before we get it. But then what happens? We bring it to you guys, the vets. Now all of a sudden the dog's in the middle of, right in the beginning of that hazard avoidance period, and now you guys come along and jab it with needles. Like, come on, you know what I mean? Like, the dog must be fearful. That's why a lot of the dogs are fearful of vets.
Yeah.
So if we can create a really positive experience at the vets, at the playgrounds, at wherever it is, you know what I mean? Then the dog starts on a good footing, and we can then slowly carry on. I've had a number of people that come along and go, no, my dog's sociable because I've got 3 other dogs at home. You know, there's a behaviourist in America who comes along, and if your dog has not seen over 100 dogs before 6 months of age, it's not social.
Wow.
I'm like, who on earth can actually do that amount of dogs? But it's not the fact that you have to. It's the fact that you've got a goal. Let's put the dog in front of as many things as possible. And I think that's what's really, really critical in the beginning of those puppies' lives with us in a new family.
So you talk about dogs being fearful of coming to the vet. So would you advise, obviously they've got to come in for vaccinations. How do you get them familiar with even the journey to the vet? You know, how do you make it a positive? You know, I feel very strongly about fear-free pets, and I have obviously set up our practice to try and take into consideration all aspects from separate cats and dog waiting rooms to pumping pheromones into the cat area. You know, there's lots of things, features, separate cat scales, and we cover the cages when people wait with their cats so that they feel calm. What are the sort of things that owners can do to make that experience a positive experience right from the start, or to improve the previous experience? Vet visit.
So let's start, as I say, it's from a young puppy.
Yeah.
First of all, enroll in a puppy class.
Okay.
And most puppy classes are actually at vets.
Yes.
So it's really, really nice that they go along and play with their friends. Okay, do something good, and also can quickly go in there, maybe get weighed. Nothing negative to the dog. You know, the reception's got a nice little treat for the dog, or whatever the story is, and it's really, really good interaction with a number of different people and the different smells and things like that. So that's number one. Second is that your trip in and out, a lot of people come along and feed the dogs at the wrong time. When I say at the wrong time, is that they put a lot of food or feed the dog, then put in the car because, it's an either early event or a late afternoon event. Okay. So now the dog has got a full stomach and vomits because, you know, maybe going over speed bumps, around corners, through potholes. And now the dog vomits. Now the dog has an association with the car feeling sick. Okay. So rather be very conscious about, is the dog's stomach settled? Number one. Okay. So that's the trip wherever you're going. Doesn't matter, to the dog park, to the vet, to your neighbour.
And would you encourage that? Put your dog in the car, take them to the shops.
You know, absolutely. Even to the point where some dogs, I even recommend that you feed the dog in the car.
Oh.
You know, so the car's not started. The dog literally is just there eating, get out.
Okay.
Then you start the car, put the dog in, dog eats, get out. Switch the car off,
wow.
of course. Okay. Then you would come along and take the dog up and down the driveway, if it is that fearful, or car sick. Some dogs, they're so small because they're small puppies, they can't see out the window. So if you could raise the puppy in the car that can see out the window, that also helps the dog.
Oh, that's great
Okay,
advice.
so it's little things that we can do. Then, you know, the times when you're driving down and you're going to go, hold on a minute, I'm going past the vet. Well, I'm going to put the dog in the car, take it into the vet, literally walk in, hi, how are you doing? Walk out. You don't have to make an appointment to say hello to the receptionist. All the vets are quite happy. I know your vet practices. You know, so I really, really recommend that you actually take your dog to the vet just to get a treat. And it will make a world of difference to that dog for the rest of its life.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So the situation now is your dog's sick and they've got to come in and there's nothing we can do about it. If you know you have a fearful dog, what do you advise? Do you think it's worth informing
Yeah, I think
ahead of time? Can you, and we like to know, I know that, you know, if you contact our practice and you say, you know, I'm coming in just to let you know that our dog's a bit scared, we make every effort to try and ensure that we don't make the situation any worse. But, you know, what are the sort of things that you can do in terms of trying to make that experience?
I think from both veterinary practices and ownership point of view is that, yes, open that communications up, number one. Okay. And take the owner's words seriously. And I think it's sometimes, don't worry, we've got the right handlers. Actually, sometimes it's not actually, there might be very good handlers, but the dog just won't cope with it. So look and see, first of all, breed-specific behaviours, okay, number one, and what have we got to handle the dog. Also, I'm going to suggest also telling the owner not to bring the dog in. Arrive at the clinic, leave the dog in the car, if we've got somebody, or with the window open, come in and go, right, I'm here. Okay. So instead of dragging the dog through the reception, and maybe you've had 2 walk-ins, it's out of your control. So now you've got 2 other people with 2 other animals in the clinic. Now this dog walks in and goes, I can't cope, and I'm still feeling ill. Or it might be an emergency. Rather leave your dog in there, go in, assess the situation. Again, tell the receptionist and the vet that I have this dog, these are the potential problems. We've had problems in the past, so we don't want to reoccur.
So you're minimizing the amount of time that the dogs are in
Correct.
that fearful
Absolutely.
situation.
You know, I know I've done this at your practice a number of times where I've taken dogs in, and because we know the behavior of the dogs, is that I would walk the dog in just through the door and then walk it out immediately. Oh wow, nothing really negative happened. Oh my word. And walk it around your car park. You know what I mean? And then do it a little bit further in. Every single time we just go in and out, in and out, in and out. And the dog just goes, we're going in there again, sure. And then the vet sees it, as opposed to dragging it in. Dogs like bullying itself into a frenzy. And I found just walking it, exercise, just movement actually reduces stress. So if you just keep that dog moving around a little bit, it really helps that dog. And if the vet understands it, when they might say, we are ready for you, and you might be able to say, the owner being, give me 2 more minutes. I think it's communication, and I think it's really vital that we have that communication with everybody within the practice and the owner.
Absolutely, totally agree. So other scenarios that you find you're approached to advise on. So what do people mistake as different behavior to fear?
They come across aggression, you know, and just getting back to your clinic.
Biting.
You know, coming back to your clinic scenario is that if you've got a dog which is clearly tense, you know, we don't want anybody being damaged by it. And we also don't want to put the dog through more pressure by mishandling. You know, when I say mishandling, are we purposely going to go along and, you know, grab the dog and wrestle it to the ground? No, not at all. We don't want to do that.
No.
But so let's prevent it from happening. And in those cases, let's use a muzzle. I know not every dog is trained to handle a muzzle, but if the vet's going to handle it for, a couple of minutes, Let's rather make sure everybody is safe, including the dog, by wearing a muzzle. I've got no issues with that, as long as it's well fitted, the correct size muzzle, the correct type of muzzle, things like that. Where, if we are doing it properly, we can even explain to the owner on how to put it on properly, so the vet or the assistant doesn't even come in contact with the dog until it is safe, and explain to the owner why we're using it.
Absolutely.
It's not the fact that just muzzle your damn dog.
Yeah, I think a lot of our clients get very upset or very offended if we want to use a muzzle. Probably not understanding that we're actually able to control them a bit better and more gently.
Correct.
If they are muzzled.
Correct.
And obviously within our profession we really rely on the use of our hands, so to be bitten is a big issue.
It's a huge problem.
But I think, obviously perception that as soon as they're muzzled we're going to be handling them with, in fact it happens to be less restrained because they're muzzled.
Correct.
And I think a muzzle is
and it's an important aspect that
tool.
we need to be able to communicate to the owner that actually muzzles are not a bad thing, for individual dogs. Do you have to do every dog? No, not at all. But some dogs, because the owner has told you that it's a potential biter, and then also the next thing is, say, taking the owner's advice of saying, right, well, if that's the case, let's rather muzzle it. So in other words, we can be calmer around the dog. We don't have to be that stressed about it. And muzzles
down the
work.
situation,
Absolutely work.
They work very well.
Yeah.
So how often do you see fear biting? I mean, obviously it's a major issue, and we've been in that terrible situation of having to make the call on euthanizing a pet in the event of them biting a child, or a continuous situation of inter-house fighting between dogs. So it's a big issue.
Yeah.
Particularly in the time when we're dealing with rabies and a major outbreak of rabies in South Africa. Fear biting is a problem. How do we teach our kids, for example, to avoid these sort of situations? Because I know we talk training from a young age in puppies. As a mother, it's my responsibility to try and teach my child how to handle and manage situations to not make our pets fearful. And I come across it more frequently than I'd like to admit. They just don't understand. So how do we teach our kids? What are the main...
I think a lot of the time, I'm quite passionate about bite prevention, because the dogs always get the bad rap, but our behaviour, or the child's behaviour, or in fact doesn't matter whose behaviour it is that sometimes spurs on that fight response, simply out of fear. Again, it goes back to breed specifics. We could come along and get dogs that are, they want to chase, kids who are running after the ball, that kind of stuff. A lot of the time I will find that it'll be accidents, because the kid might grab the ball at the same time as the dog does. And those kind of things we can accept. We're going to go, be more conscious about where the dog is. But you also do get those times where, you look at a child's arm and you're going to go, wow, was that a dog bite? And although it might have just been a bruise to start with, what's the next one going to be? Has the dog got any bite inhibition? And if it doesn't, then we need to really and truthfully work on that. But what caused that dog to actually open its mouth onto a child's arm? Was it excitement? Okay. Or was it threat? And I'm saying threat, a kid might come along and go, scream and shout and push its arms out to the dog because the child is fearful, and that also sometimes causes the issues. So
some of the signs you see, we've spoken about this before, there are subtle signs that you can perhaps teach them to recognize that dog is fearful, whether it's, tail tuck or yawning or...
Absolutely. So a lot of the time, immediately it is, the fear side of it is tail tucking, okay, head lowering, all right, so flattened ears,
okay,
licking its lips a lot. It's although it's acceptance, but it's also indicating no, and it's trying to just tell you that just leave me alone.
Yeah.
Okay. Then on the other side, when you're looking at aggression, dogs are maybe pushing their chest out, straightening their front legs.
Oh, wow.
The tail goes stiffer. His tail stops moving. all those kind of things. Ears pricked, mouth closed.
Oh.
Believe it or not, there's a lot of different things we can read on dogs' bodies where you're going to go, oh, why is that happening? And there's just too much focus when the dog's mouth is closed. Dog's mouth's open, tongue normally, breathing normally okay. But at the moment the dog closes its mouth and tenses up, hold on, rather just step back for your own safety. What's happening? Then assess why it's like it. It might not nothing be to do with you or the child, but it might be something behind you. Oh, well, it's only that. It's only a monkey in the tree. Well, that's okay. I can relax a bit.
Okay.
But I find that a lot of times when you have dog and dog fights, it is a lot of resource guarding over the owner or over food or over a ball or something like that. Okay. And now you've got dog and dog. And that's what you guys see a lot. You know, you see the patient, you see the actual, you never see the human patient. They go to the human hospital, you know. But that is one thing that we see quite often, as I say, these fighting amongst other dogs. And then when it comes down to owners being bitten, a lot of the time it's because the owners are trying to get in the middle of that fight.
Sure.
So now the owner has to go to hospital, the two dogs go to the hospital, and everything could have been prevented by just taking the ball away.
Or reading the cues.
Reading the cues, exactly. Listening to your dogs, because the dogs, you know, often I find a lot of people have said to me, the dog showed nothing, did not tell me anything, it just happened. I disagree. The dog will always tell you something, but you're just not
Need
observant.
to listen. Okay.
And it's the dog's under the chair, dropped his ears. Maybe you didn't see it, but the dog still is telling you something, and it's just progressing to go, I've tried to warn, I've tried to do this, I've maybe growled, I've done this, but I'm ignoring it. And all of a sudden the dog goes, actually enough's enough, I'm going to go out there, I'm now having to go to the next level, and it might be a nip. Oh, now the dog's aggressive, it never even just tells me, it just wants to bite me. No.
And I suppose it results in a lot of pets being given up.
Absolutely. But we could resolve that problem, as opposed to putting it onto the burden of welfare, and the dog has to be euthanized just because it's got it's you know, yes, it's bitten somebody, yes, but if it was your dog, let's rather resolve the problem, and we can. I'm not going to say every single dog we can resolve. We can't. We don't save every dog, unfortunately, but we can really do a big number and really make a big difference to the environment in which the dogs live in.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey today. We've covered some fascinating insights and had the opportunity to dive deep into our topic. But wait, there's more. We're splitting this episode into 2 parts because there is still so much to explore. We want to give you some time to reflect on everything we've discussed so far. So we'll be taking a brief pause here. But don't worry, part 2 is just around the corner. Make sure to mark your calendars and join us again next week as we continue this captivating conversation. In the meantime, if you have any questions or thoughts you'd like to share, feel free to reach out to us on our social media using the hashtag Paws and Effect podcast. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe or follow our podcast so you don't miss out on the continuation of this exciting discussion. Stay tuned for part 2 coming your way next week.